photography. We're going to build something today. So this is the long-awaited, sorry about that, macro photography cage. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to split this up into 3 parts so you can skip ahead if you want to. First thing I'm going to do is explain the concept of what we're building and why. Second, I'll go through all of the parts that you need. There's going to be a cutting list, kind of a detailed description of the parts you need and the cuts you need to make. And then in the third part, I'm actually going to assemble the whole thing. I think I'm going to wait until a separate video to actually show you how to use all of the various features on it, because this is an incredibly flexible platform. You can do a tremendous amount with it. So without wasting any more time, the concept here is that I built one of these a few years ago, and then I built a better one after that, and it got destroyed in my move. I wish I could show it to you, but what I'm doing today is basically replicating that. And I'll say right up front that this should be, if you're a tall hander, you should take this as a general guide, because depending on where you're living or what materials you have access to, you may not be able to get exactly the same thing that I'm using, but the concept is the same. So I wanted a platform that would allow me to do macro photography very quickly without having to do a whole lot of setup. Every time I wanted to take a few photographs, I didn't have to go get light stands and lights and get everything arranged so that I could start taking pictures, because the setup takes a while. So the concept here is that the whole setup stays done, and it's a fairly compact piece of kit when we get done. So if you've got a spare corner in the house, you can sit it in there and then pull it out when you need it, and it will fit on a fairly small coffee table. That's, I guess, relative. It might fit on a very small coffee table, but it'll probably hang over the edges. So the concept is partly to just make macro photography easier to set up, but also it creates a very unique way to position lights, diffuser panels, gels in a very flexible way with just a few seconds of adjustments to the cage. Now, there's another purpose that it serves that I didn't really think was important until I moved into this house that has a converted trampoline for the floor where everything vibrates when you walk around. One of the things that you can do to limit the impact of vibration on your macro photography, which is killer if you don't have a concrete floor to work on, is if you put everything, meaning the specimen and the camera and even your lights, on the same platform, then they have a tendency to vibrate synchronously so that you get less obvious movement if the specimen was on one surface and the camera was on a tripod, for example. So that is the idea. Now, I had to take into account the fact that sometimes I'm using a macro lens, meaning that if my specimen is down here in the center of the cage and I'm using a macro lens, I might need to have the camera in a position like this. You know, the minimum focus distance on this lens is 11 inches. It's 85 millimeter micro Nikkor. So that would mean the camera would have to be back here somewhere. But if I was using a set of extension tubes and a reversed enlarger lens or a stack of composited lenses, I may need to have the camera 4 millimeters from the specimen, or I may need to have the end of the lens assembly. So we need to be able to reposition the camera quickly and easily while maintaining the stability of the platform. So that is the general idea. And then there are a couple of ancillary ideas that come along with that. One is we really need a central way to access power, because quite a few of the light sources that I use, especially when I'm using continuous lighting, need a place to plug them in. So I build that into the cage as well. But this is equally fantastic using flash, because you can position 10 speed lamps on this cage when you get it finished, which means you can have very customized light. So let me get into the parts that you're going to need and the tools that you're going to need. Now, the key obviously is going to be the base and the cage, and everything else will be built onto that. So what I have done is I have picked up 1/2 inch thick MDF, medium density fiber board. They call it other things, and in fact over here in America I think it's called just fiber board. Yeah, it's extremely dense. It does not do well outdoors. It's something that needs to be kept in the dry, and it's heavy as all get out. It doesn't hold a lot of screws particularly well, and it has a tendency to chip, so we have to be careful when we're working with it. Now, when it comes to the cage that goes on top of the base, I am going to be using PVC. Now, you can use anything that you can get your hands on, but the 1/2 inch PVC pipe here is the perfect size for using clamps on to attach flashes. All of the lights that I have clamp perfectly onto this size. It doesn't have any sharp edges, and it allows you to move things around. It's fairly light, which is a bit problematic. And of course, it has a tiny bit of flex. It's not much, because this is the very thick walled brand. I have no idea what it's called. 600 psi. So Schedule 40 is the type of pipe, and I'll put this in the description. I have made this with steel pipes, galvanized steel, the same stuff I used to build this big scrim. It's fairly lightweight, but it's solid metal, and it makes the whole thing a bit heavier but a bit more stable. I have looked at doing it with copper pipe. I've just chosen this mainly for simplicity, because when you're using this, you don't need to cut screws into anything. You don't need to weld or solder anything. This can all be done with cement. Now, what I did on the last plastic one of these I made, I don't know where I put my ball bearings, but I have about a 20-pound jar of tiny little ball bearings the size of BBs, and I poured them into all of these rods after it was constructed to add weight and stabilize it. I don't think it helped, and it definitely didn't help when the bottom bar broke off and I spilled 10,000 BBs all over the floor. I'm still finding them years later. Anyway, I'm digressing, aren't I? So let's run through the bits you're going to need a bit more specifically, because we've got the base. This is a 2 feet wide by 4 feet long piece of medium density fiber board, 1/2 inch thick. If you can pick it up, I couldn't pick it up at the shop, the 1 inch thick. Get that. If you have the muscles and the room to put it, it weighs probably a real ton. It feels like it anyway. 1 inch thick would be ideal because it's going to hold screws better and we are going to be screwing into it. But 1/2 inch will work too. So that's 2 feet by 4 feet. Then we're going to need a number of these lengths of PVC pipe. Now, they sell them at a shop called Home Depot here in America, cut into 2-foot sections for about $1.18 a piece, which is a pretty, I think, good way to buy them because it's easier than trying to carry a big long piece of PVC in your car, which I can't do. So you're going to need 3 of these for the base because we don't want a bottom part of the cage at the front. So we're going to need a horseshoe shape, 3 on the bottom, then we're going to need 4 uprights, and then we're going to need 4 at the top. So that should be 11 pieces of 2-foot PVC. I am going to be going outside and cutting these all down by 4 inches in just a few minutes because I found that when the cage gets too big, it's harder to be precise with your lighting. So the last couple I've made have been 2 feet by 2 feet by 2 feet cages, but I'm going to build this one a little smaller, and I'll show you why when we get into building it. So that's the next thing you need. You're going to need a way to connect the PVC pipes. To do so, we use these three-way connectors, 3 holes at right angles that all fit the 1/2 inch pipe. We're going to need 2 L-shaped ones because they will be at the front because there's no crossbar at the front. So 2 of those. I think I have 2 of them, yeah. And then you're going to need 6 of the 3 right angles. And that's all you're going to need for the cage. Then we're going to need to have a way to secure the cage to the base so that it doesn't slide or get nudged. And there are many ways to do this. I recommend these conduit clips. I made that up. They're not called conduit clips. They're clips though, and they're made to hold conduit, which is this. So you can get them in the electrical section of a hardware shop. And the reason I like them is they only have one side that needs to be screwed in. These clip around the pipe like this, like so. And once they're on the pipe, this screws down and it holds very firmly on the MDF. Buy yourself about 2 packets of 4 of these soft bumpers. These are designed to go on the bottom of things so that they don't scratch the floor, but they're tall enough that the parts of this construction that are going to be underneath the fiberboard won't touch the table you have it on. So I usually use at least 6 of the individual bumpers, 1 in each corner, and then a couple more at the other end, just to hold it up there. You could also, if you bought some of that lovely plastic rubber stuff I use to make diffusers with, if you've got a piece of that, just cut out a few squares of that and glue them to the bottom of the board. That's an equally great way to do it. What other stuff? You're going to need 1 piece of, this is 1 inch square dowel. I don't actually I thought dowel was round. Anyway, it's not round, it's square, 1 inch by 1 inch by 1 inch. 3/4 of an inch. Yes, as I was saying, 3/4 of an inch square. And you're going to need right at 3 feet. And it comes in a 3-foot piece at your hobby shop. Okay, we're going to be cutting this down and I'll show you what we'll use it for in a minute. You're going to need another couple of pieces of wood, but what we're going to do, because this panel is too big for what we're doing, we're going to take the other piece of wood that we need from the piece we cut off of this. So that'll be good. In a minute, I'll show you where the cuts need to be. You're going to need a straight edge and one of these didgeridoos for making right angles, because you really need to get your measurements pretty accurate. So use a pencil, and I write and draw on the wood surface. It'll erase if you want it to. Most people will probably end up, when they finish doing this, disassembling it and then painting it, which is great. It's fun to do, makes it look real unique. There's a benefit too to painting these things black, so you're not getting a lot of reflections bouncing around. I'm not going to be painting this, maybe as a separate issue later on. Some kind of a power strip. It doesn't need to be fancy, but if you've got at least 4 of these, I think that would be good. You may or may not wish to have a strip light. This is a little LED strip light that I will be attaching to the inside of the cage. And it's not for photographic lighting. It's just so that you can see what you're doing when you're placing the specimen and messing around with your camera settings. It's just to help you see what's going on. This is very much just if you feel it would be useful. You're going to need a jar of all-purpose cement. This stuff, it's not contact cement, so I'm going to probably have to watch a video on how you're supposed to use this. But yeah, it's all-purpose cement, and it is made for sticking PVC together. There are a couple of power tools that you're going to need. There are other ways you can get around it, but these are the ones that I found are most helpful. 3 power tools. Did I say 2? 3. You're going to need a drill. It can be a cordless drill or a corded one. It doesn't matter. The saw that I like to use is just one of these inexpensive jigsaws. You need to know how to use one, of course, and you're going to want to set up a cutting jig, and I'll explain that to you when we get ready to do that. But just a way to be able to ensure that you're cutting a straight line. So we'll use this for all of our straight line cuts. The only other tool that we're going to need is this beastie looking thing, which is a router. This is a handheld router. This is a lightweight one. It doesn't feel very lightweight. It has a spinning blade on the bottom, and it cuts an incredibly clean, smooth hole in wood. And I'll explain to you right now why we need to cut a hole in the wood and why a router is the best way to go. You can also use a drill and drill a series of holes and then cut the rest of the material out. It's a bit messier, it doesn't work quite as well, and it's not as smooth when you operate it. You're probably wondering, why do we need to cut a hole in anything? So let me explain that to you. I was telling you that the camera needs to be able to move from very close to fairly far away quickly and easily. The way we do that is we're going to build a sled that the camera sits on. It's going to be made out of this wood, and I'll show you how we do it. But the camera is going to sit on this piece of wood, or let me go back a step. This, which I'll discuss in just a second, will be sitting on the wood sled that we're building. And the wood sled's going to be about 6 inches long. And at the back of the sled, there will be a hole through the wooden sled, and the groove that I'm describing now in the base here. And through that, we're going to add this set of 2 big washers and a twist-on plastic nut that goes on the top. And of course, the reason is, the purpose of this is that we can loosen this screw, slide our whole photography platform backward or forward, and then lock it in place so that it's rock stable again. That's what this is all about. And it's the hardest part of this project. Now, it happens to be the same concept that I use on the jig that I use for making bracelets. In fact, my shop doesn't have another one of these knobs right now, so I've had to cannibalize this jig, but I can show you the way it works. So this is the little sled for the jig. The one for the camera is going to be bigger than this. And it sits in a groove between these two pieces of wood. And then the bolt goes through the groove that has been cut in the bottom. This is the groove we're going to be cutting in this, and through the hole in the sled. And then, well, I forgot the washer, but you get the point. And once that's tightened down, this sled can't move. And that's exactly what we're replicating here. Okay, so that with the mere twist of 1 or 2 turns of this, it will loosen it, and you can position your camera exactly where you want it. Now, of course, you won't be using this to make fine movements with the camera. If you're doing focus stacking or something, you're going to need a way to advance the camera in small increments, which of course is why we have a dirt cheap 2-way focusing rail. I can't remember where this came from. It was the cheapest one that I could find on eBay, and quite frankly, it's really served me well over the years. I had a nice one, a really nice one, and it was borrowed and has yet to be returned. But it doesn't matter what sled you have, there will be an attachment on the bottom. To show that to you, though, let me take that off. There will be an attachment on the bottom of any sled that you buy, and we will attach that permanently to the, well, not permanently, you can unscrew it from the bottom, but we'll be attaching that to the sled. Now, there's an intermediate piece that I've put here because I have found this extraordinarily useful depending on what I'm photographing. And we'll talk about the lab lifter as well in a second. But this device, if you tighten it properly, allows you to raise the platform. And this is secured to the top here. And you can actually change the angle so that you can have your camera and sled pointing downward or upward. And this doesn't move. Once it's got even with a heavy camera, it doesn't move. You just have to tighten the bolts really well. But so that's all this is. I'll try to find the name of this, this focusing rail, but I think it cost under $20, maybe even less than that. You don't even need to have one with this other dimensional mover because, I mean, I like it because it allows you to move a tiny bit left or right, but it's also pretty easy to move the specimen down here. I tend to lock my specimen in place so that it doesn't move at all. So this is handy for me to have this other dimension of movement. But the primary one is the button on the right at the bottom. I've locked that. That allows you to advance the camera or pull it back. So you know what that is. But what we're going to do is attach this to the sled, attach this to the shelf thing, and then put our camera in position here. And when we're all finished, we'll have the camera So you can see what height approximately, just about like so, plus the sled underneath it. And that is why we use this last piece. This is called a lab lifter. I got this one from China. No flu on it, I don't think. And this is made for lifting lab equipment so that you can put your Erlenmeyer flask where you want it. And it has a lot of travel. And I use these a tremendous amount. So they come in all different sizes. This is just a 4" by 4" lifter. And normally what I will do is I will drill 4 shallow holes so that this stays in position. If you're going to do that, you're going to need a device or a drill bit called a Forstner bit, Forstner. That cuts a shallow hole in the wood and allows the feet to go into it. And we'll be doing that later, so I'll show you how that works. So yes, a cheap lab platform like this will allow you to move your specimen in tiny increments up and down to get your perfect framing for your shot. Last thing, I already said last thing, but make sure that you have the right kind of blades for your saw. This stuff is hard to work with and does not do well with fast cutting blades. The fast cutting blades look a little like that. And they're fairly brutal looking with very big sharp teeth. They're great for cutting wood fast, but they leave raggedy edges. So we'll be using a much finer blade to cut out these pieces, which will take our time to do. What have I forgotten? Yes, I've forgotten the secret ingredient. There is one secret ingredient that... No, I've forgotten 2 things. The reason we're going to be cutting this into 2, I think it's about 16" lengths, is we're going to glue these and probably screw them to create the channel that our sled is going to go in so it can't turn. So we'll cut the correct lengths. I've marked all of the dimensions on the board, and I'll walk you through those next after I explain about the secret ingredient. When you have MDF on MDF, it doesn't slide really well. It's not that important because you're not actually trying to do anything photographic when you move the sled. You're just positioning the camera so that you can use your focus rail. However, it irritates me when it sticks. So I asked permission to do this. So I'm not, I asked the salesperson at the shop if I could do this. They have free samples of floor tiles at Home Depot so that you can take them home and get permission from your wife to buy the panels that you want. So I picked up a stack of the shiniest ones because they feel almost like PTFE or Teflon. They are very low coefficient of friction surfaces. So what I do is I'll be placing a track of these pieces of tile in the bottom of our sled run. And then we're going to be attaching one of these to the base of our sled so that we have slick on slick, and it'll allow you to really position it quickly and easily. But anyway, I recommend that you actually ask somebody at Home Depot. They are free and it has free written on it. But I asked the manager, I said, I'm not taking these home I'm not planning on buying any wooden floors. I just want to have a couple of these things. Is that all right? And he said, absolutely. Now, it wasn't the owner of Home Depot who might have thought differently about that, but he wasn't in, so there you go. So that's all the pieces that you need. I can't think of anything else. And yeah, look at the parts list to know exactly what they are. Now I'm going to walk you through setting up the cuts, where you need to do your cuts so that you get everything done right. So the first cut that we need to make is to every one of our 11 pieces of PVC. The easiest way to do this is we're going to be cutting 4 inches off the end. So use a tape measure, measure 4 inches from the end, mark it with a felt tip pen. And what I like to do, because it's just so much easier, is once I have the first piece marked, I'll build a little jig type thing just by clamping some pieces of wood to my work table, such that when I put the pipe in here, the cut line is going to be in the same place every time. So I'll cut the first one, then I'll put the second one in and cut it, and so on, without having to measure every one. So cut those. If you want to use one of these, which is a PVC pipe cutter, the way this thing works is you put the PVC pipe between the rollers like so, and then I'm not going to do it, and I'll tell you why, and then screw the blade down a little and crank this thing around the pipe, screw it down a bit more, do it again, until eventually it eats through the pipe and it comes apart. The problem with it is this brings up an edge, a bulge at the cut edge, to where sometimes they won't fit into the joints. So I prefer to just use a saw to cut these. I'll use the electrical saw, but they're very easy to cut with a decent hand saw too. So this is the end that the light cage is going to be on. I measured about 10 inches in from the end, which in my experience is the best place to have your specimen, is 10 inches from the back and about 6 inches up in the air, because this will allow you to position lights the best. So that's going to be the center of our platform. We don't need to do anything else with that. We just need to be aware of it. And then with my camera and the focusing rail and everything attached to one another, I positioned the whole assembly with the front of my longest lens set up, almost touching where the specimen would be. And I marked that as the end for the sled, not for the camera, but for the sled the camera will be on. And then I pulled it back about as far as I thought you'd need it. I mean, if you have a really large subject that you're trying to photograph, you'll probably end up having to put your camera on a tripod back over there. This is really for small subject macro, but you'll be able to, anything that fits in your field with the sled all the way back here and your camera cranked all the way to the back will work. So measure from the edge. Remember, this MDF, they tend to be very accurate, these boards, the way they're cut. So what I've done is I've measured from the edge to 12 inches in several places, and then connected those marks into a center line, because everything is going to be built around that center line. So depending on the size bolt you're using will determine the size of your groove. You don't want the groove to be a lot bigger than the bolt. You want it to go through comfortably without touching on either side. If you have a router, use a router bit that is slightly larger than the bolt to give you some room to play with. Now, there are many different ways that you can cut this hole. One way, as I said, is to take a drill bit and drill a lot of holes that are connected almost, and then put in a small coping saw or one of those Japanese woodworking saws and just cut the rest of the material out. Like I say, it's a bit messy and it can bind on the screw. So what I'll do in order to make this cut is I will clamp to this board a couple of pieces of scrap wood, and I'll clamp them so that the router fits exactly between them with no play, and that channel will hold the router right where I want it. And then I will simply plunge it in, march it up to the end and pull it out, and it will leave me a perfect curved edged slit all the way through the wood. You just have to make sure that you have the router set to go all the way through the wood. That's really, this is one of my least favorite tools to use because it terrifies me, because it's heavy, and I think this one's got a 2 horsepower motor in it, and it's like holding a horse, a small but very powerful pair of horses in your hands. And I'm always concerned about this thing kicking back and that type of thing. But that's why, if you're not used to using one of these, get somebody to do it for you. Somebody except me to do it for you, and you'll be all set. All right, so we don't need any more cuts in the middle. All we need is the groove, because I have measured. I know that my sled is going to be 4 inches wide and 6 inches long, because that's the way I designed it. So I have made this exactly 4 inches wide. And once we've cut these pieces of dowel, they will be glued to the board either side of where the sled will be. Okay, so there's nothing else we need to cut there. So when it comes to the length of the board, we have a couple of issues. First of all, we want to be sure that the groove for the sled locking mechanism is far enough away from the edge of the board that you're not going to end up with a weak area there where it could break. So I would recommend leaving at least 3 or 4 inches. The other part of that balance, though, is we don't want to be 3 feet back from our camera, because we're going to be trying to use the camera. So we want to be able to get comfortably to the camera at its furthest extent forward in the rail. So what I suggest you do, and what I've put in the cutting diagram, is we're going to cut this board at 15 inches from the end on the other side. So again, you just measure a few places to 15 inches and make a mark, and then connect the lines. Use one of those triangles to make sure you're getting your lines perpendicular. And this now is the cut line to separate the project board from the scrap. So this is the 15-inch cut that I talked about right here. So this is 15 inches deep. What I have done is I have measured the length of the panel, which is 6 inches, and marked it several times and connected the lines here. And then I have made 6 4-inch sections. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to cut the main piece off, and then I am going to, with the same saw, with the same fine cutting blade, I'm going to cut a line right across here, turn it sideways. If you have a table saw, which I don't, this is the work of a few moments. If you're doing it by hand, it takes longer. If you're cutting it with a saw, it'll take even longer still. I should have mentioned that. If you've got a workshop, you're probably bored to death listening to me talk, because this is all very basic stuff. But I don't have a workshop instrument. So what I will do, though, is I will clamp a guide like this and then I'll position my saw so that that guide runs, the blade's edge, the saw's edge runs right along that guide the whole way to the end, keeping it perfectly straight to take this piece off. And then I'll have this nice piece of scrap left over for other projects, but I'll have more than enough to build the sled from this. And I don't need to cut all of these. I may just cut the two that we're going to use. So that's it. That's all the cutting you've got to do. There's nothing else that we need to drill. There's nothing else that we need to do right at this minute. Once we have done the cuts, we're going to flip this over onto its front, or onto its back, and we're going to put the rubber feet in. We're going to do that early so that we don't forget and have to put the feet on with the thing up on its side. So I am going to go outside, and I'm going to make all of these cuts. I'm not going to take my camera outside because it's pouring with rain. I'll be quick, and when I come back, I'll show you what we've got, and we'll move on to the next stage, which is going to be assembly. Noticed it is now dark, but I did get all the cuts made. So the base is finished, and I have the groove that I was talking about cut. I have the board cut to size. But before we do anything else, before I start putting the cage together, I need to get the feet put on the underside. I picked these ones. They're available at Home Depot because they take a screw that has a fairly large flat top so that it doesn't cut through the rubber thingamajig. Now I've got 8 of these, which is 2 packets. I know I want to have one towards the corner, so I'll have 4 of those, about like that. And I think what I might do to support the center of the thing, I'll put one about halfway. You see, I'm not even bothering measuring this. One about halfway down, and that will leave me with 2 more that I can use. And I think I'll put one here and one here. Yeah, that will make for a nice, stable platform. I'm going to put a tiny little starter hole where the screws are going to go. I think drilling this little hole will make it a little bit easier. We'll try it. The trick here is not to drill through your dining room table or drill backwards. Let's try that. All right, I think that's probably all it's going to take. Let's give it a try. Yeah, it just needs something to catch onto. And then I would be careful not to screw it too far in case the foot gets a little squashed, just until it's not wiggling around. That's all there is to it. So I will be back in a second when they're all put together. Okay, that is all 8 of my feet attached. I decided to put 2 in the middle to prevent the board from sagging. Though honestly, this material doesn't do a lot of sagging. Okay, we're going to flip it on its feet and see how that does. That is rock solid. That is not moving. In fact, I can't move it at all. Brilliant. Okay, let's put this aside while I show you how to put together the cage. All right, so I read the instructions on this glue, and the instructions were clearly written by somebody with no sense of humor, and I am not going to follow all the steps. They want me. God, this really stinks. There was just too many steps. It wanted me to prime things. So what we're going to do is make sure the end is clean like that, and then you've got to cover every little bit of the end of your pipe about I don't know, 3/4 of an inch or something like that. And then you do the same thing with the fitting. Now that's going to be the front of the thing. So also do the inside of the bit that it's connecting to, just like so. This is really evil smelling stuff. And then all you've got to do is ram this puppy home. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter the angle you put it on for this one. It's going to matter from now on. From now on, everything's got to be lined up properly. You end up with a seriously wonky cage. So we'll let that one set for a little while, and we'll do the other front pipe. What I should have told you was check that the thing fits before you put the glue on it. That's important. It does. So I'm going to do exactly the same thing I did there. And these are L-shaped instead of three-way because there isn't going to be a third pipe across the front. That's why these are like this. So hold your breath when I take this thing off, because it's just... I hope you can't hear that beeping in the background. I don't know what it is, but it's irritating. So a slathering of glue in the hole, and then along the bottom. You know, there's not going to be water flowing through these, so all we need to do is just hold the ends in place. So don't panic about it. There we go. Number 2, it's a good idea to check when you stuck the end on that your other two are exactly the right length, because now would be the time that you could adjust how far you push that tube in. We're going to now do the same with a couple of other tubes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to connect these to the back pipe like so, and then we'll have the whole base done and we can go from there. So to do that, I'm going to need to put one on there, and then the crossbar in. And I think it will be easier to do if I put it on these ones first. Okay, so same thing. It's exactly the same. If you've got a mask or a scuba diving tank or something, I would recommend using it, not to breathe this stuff. It's way worse than that contact cement. And then same thing here. Okay, that looks good. Now's when we have to make sure we get it lined up right. So be thinking the whole time what's going to be what's going to be attached to this next. So these need to both point straight up. And they do. So we'll leave that one to settle down for a minute. And then this will keep going. Now I know you don't want to watch this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a three-way joint on each of these pipes. And then I'll get back to you and show you how we put the various sections together. This is the base. And everything is lining up great. Now what we need to do is put the uprights in, and that is, as you probably guessed, exactly the same. I told you this wasn't a big deal. The hardest part of this whole project is going to be setting up the sled, which will be the last thing that we do. To make the sled, I had to glue one part of the sled to one of the slippy tiles, and that's going to take several hours to set up before I can drill the holes. And you're going to start to appreciate when this thing comes together just how many options you have for attaching lights. The last step is to put the roof on it, and these things are already, they're not twisting, they're already glued tight. This is where you can really mess it up if you don't pay attention, like I frequently don't. You have to be sure that you put these things on with the holes facing to the next place. If you put it on like this, you'll have to come up with a new kind of cage because they won't connect to the other pieces. All right, so let's finish this job off. Now, the way this is, even when the glue has set, there's just enough play to get the two cross pieces in, but I would have them both ready to go at the same time. That, my friends, is the hard part. We're gonna lock this thing down to the board because that's the next thing we need to do. What I have chosen to hold this cage onto the board are these conduit clamps. They've got a serrated edge that holds the conduit pretty firmly in there, and it just takes one one screw straight into the wood. So the first thing I'm going to do is snap two of these onto each end. I bought 6 of them. They were 79 cents each, which I personally thought was a bit extreme, but nobody asked me, so I'm also going to introduce you to a new tool that I didn't talk about at the beginning. It's this awl, which has a very sharp point on it, and we're going to use that to mark the board where our holes need to be. So what I'm going to do is take this awl and I just push it down right through each of these holes and give a good hard push and a twist to make a fairly permanent mark. So we'll move that to the side. I think I'll use the same drill bit I used before. That's plenty. And I'll just make a little starter hole. We'll take our first screw and washer. So like I say, I'm going to do these by hand so that I can feel the progress. Absolutely perfect. I'll do one over here so you can see it more clearly. Okay. And then same thing here. That washer's the perfect size. Yeah, that could not be better. That's nice and solid. So I'm just going to continue to do this. Do the other 4 screws. Okay, guys, we are drawing to the home stretch. This is the sled, and it consists of one of those tiles I was telling you about, and I'm not going to put a base of tiles down in here because this actually slides very easily. I may put just a little coating of silicone lubricant on it, but for now, what we need to do is set the rails and the backstop. Then I need to connect the riser panel thing to the sled, which is a 1 screw job, but I'm going to have to drill a pilot hole, and that will connect these two. And then the hardest job, because I can't find the right drill bit, is going to be drilling the hole all the way through the thickest part of the back of the sled where our bolt is going to go. First thing we'll do is drill a starter hole in the sled so that we can attach that base plate. Doesn't need to be a deep hole. I'm not going to secure this until I've drilled the hole and got the sled assembly ready, but what I am going to do is super glue these rails in position. Couple of drops of ooh, that was a big drop. This is not a permanent fix I'm looking for. It's just if you put it on and then change your mind, just a swift whack with a mallet will knock this right off. If for some reason you were to put these too close together, too tight, it would just be a matter of gently and repeatedly sanding down the edges of the sled until it fit. So it's no big deal. I'm thinking I probably am going to need to paint this whole thing. It's a bit scrappy looking in places. By the time we drill these 2 holes, those will be set and ready to drill and screw, and then we'll be through. So let me go ahead and make this hole. These are the rails now screwed in place. I'm going to screw the backstop in place. I've already attached the base plate to the sled, and the very last thing we'll do is put the locking mechanism in there, and that will be it for today. And what we'll do is we'll do another video setting this thing up and showing you exactly how I use it. All right, guys. We have reached almost the end. One last step to go. These rails are now securely screwed into the base. The backstop is solid. I don't know what you call this thing, but this thing that you can stick the focus rail to get a little bit more height. This is attached now to the sled, and the sled fits perfectly in our channel. The last thing we need to do is get the locking mechanism. So all we need to do for this is slip the bolt with a big washer on the outside. So this is the bolt now going all the way through the sled and through the base. We put another washer on it. Move this out of the way so you can see. Then all we have to do is put the bolt on and then continue to tighten it as it pulls the bottom washer up against the base. So when we're using this, and I'm going to do a separate video show you how to set the whole thing up to use, but with our focus rail on here, we can position the camera in relation to the subject wherever we want it. And when we're happy with the position, we tighten the screw here, and I can pick the table up with that. In the next video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a few different setups. We'll also go through wiring up the power outlet that I was telling you about, and also installing the LED light, which we haven't done yet. But for now, this is enough for one day. This is the finished macro cage, and I would imagine sometime in the next week or so, I will be back to show you how to use this thing, and the possibilities are endless. Look, I know this was a long video, but if you do this, you'll be glad you did. I'll see you in a few days. Thanks for sticking this one out, and I'll talk to you soon. Adios.